The hospital room was bathed in artificial white light. The sterile air hung thick with antiseptic, and something more suffocating, expectation. Faces blurred around him, voices overlapped, but he only heard one sound, clear as shattering glass. It was her gasp. The woman beside him, the one who'd supposedly waited, prayed, and suffered for him, widened her eyes in shock. Tears pooled instantly. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Ethan, what did you say?" He turned his head slightly, feeling the dull ache of a body that had been lifeless for 3 years, and stared straight into the tear-filled eyes of the woman he'd once called his wife. "I said I want a divorce." The words were heavier than the years he'd spent in darkness, heavier than the love he'd once carried for her. The doctor beside him froze. The nurses exchanged uneasy glances. The beeping of the heart monitor quickened, as if even his body was rebelling against the truth he'd just spoken. She reached for his hand, but he pulled away. The cold metal of the stand became his only anchor. "No, you don't mean that," she choked out. "You're confused. You've been asleep for so long, Ethan. Please, just listen to me." He let out a low, humorless chuckle. Confused? If only that were the case. He'd heard everything, every single word. She thought he was nothing more than a breathing corpse, a burden, a shadow of the man she once loved. Yet the moment he opened his eyes, she'd had the audacity to act like the devoted wife who never left his side. The image of her whispering sweet, sinful words to another man in this very room was etched into his mind like a scar that would never fade. She had moved on. But so had he. He wasn't the same man who'd fallen asleep 3 years ago, and the woman sitting in front of him was no longer his wife. He'd once been a man who believed in love, a man who thought devotion and sacrifice meant something. Before the coma, he was Ethan Hart, CEO of Hart Dynamics, a man who'd built his life from the ground up. He wasn't born into wealth. He'd created it. Late nights, endless board meetings, sacrifices upon sacrifices. And through it all, there had been one constant in his life, Clara Bennett. Clara wasn't just his wife. She was his world. They'd met in college, a classic love story. Him, the overworked scholarship student. Her, the bright-eyed dreamer with ambition that rivaled his. They weren't perfect, but they were real. She was his partner, his equal, the person he trusted more than anyone. When he asked her to marry him, he'd had no doubts. He loved her, and she loved him. Or so he'd thought. Their marriage wasn't built on fairy tales. It was built on struggles, late-night ramen dinners, whispered promises of a future where they wouldn't have to count every dollar. And when he finally made it, when his company took off, and they could afford the life they'd once dreamed of, he thought they had it all. But life isn't a movie. Success came with long hours, missed anniversaries, empty seats at dinner tables. Somewhere between the late nights at the office and the early morning flights across the country, he'd lost her. Or maybe she was never truly his to begin with. Then the accident, a brutal crash, shattering glass, the wail of sirens in the distance, the suffocating scent of blood and gasoline. And darkness. For 3 years, he was locked away in a void, trapped in a prison of his own body, unable to move, unable to speak. But he could hear. God, help him, he could hear everything. He heard the doctors tell her he might never wake up. He heard his family crying over him. And he heard her, at first. Clara's voice had been filled with desperation. She begged him to wake up, told him she couldn't live without him. But time changes people. Soon the tears dried, the desperate pleas stopped. Then came the whispers. At first, he thought he was imagining them. The sound of another man's voice in his hospital room. Laughter that didn't belong to a grieving wife. Then came the moans. The nights when she thought no one was listening. When she thought he was nothing more than a lifeless body, incapable of knowing, of feeling, of hurting. He knew the sound of his voice. He knew the sound of her betrayal. Yet she stayed, not out of love, but because being the devoted wife of a dying man came with its own benefits, sympathy, money, control. So he stayed in his prison, listening, waiting, drowning in his own silence, until today. Today, he'd woken up, and Clara Bennett was no longer his wife. Clara's hands were shaking. Good. She should be afraid. She should feel every ounce of the agony he'd endured, trapped in his own body, listening to her whispers, her laughter, her moans with another man in the very room where she'd claimed to love him. Ethan, you're confused. she whispered, gripping his wrist as if she could anchor him back to whatever lie she thought he was still living in. You've been in a coma for 3 years. Your mind is just. He yanked his hand away. I'm not confused. I know exactly what I'm saying. I know exactly what you've done. Her lips parted. Her blue eyes, those same eyes he'd once found warmth in, shimmered with unshed tears. The act, the performance, the same facade she'd mastered over the years. Ethan, her voice broke as she reached for his face, for his hand, anything that would bring him back to her. But there was no us anymore. He let his gaze drift to her left hand. The wedding ring was gone. It wasn't even on a chain around her neck, not hidden in her pocket, not tucked in the depths of her purse. She'd moved on. She'd buried him long before he ever opened his eyes. Who is he? He asked, his voice disturbingly calm. Clara flinched, her face paled. What? Who is he? He repeated, sharper this time. Silence stretched between them. The world outside his hospital room continued. Doctors pacing, machines beeping, nurses chatting in hushed voices. But in here, it was just the two of them, and the truth suffocating her. I don't know what you're talking about, she lied, shaking her head as her fingers curled into fists. Ethan, please. We should be focusing on you, on your recovery. Let's go home. I'll take care of you. You've already taken care of me, haven't you? He interrupted, tilting his head. For 3 years, playing the grieving wife, telling everyone how hard this has been on you, while sneaking around with him. Tears welled up in her eyes, but he knew those tears weren't for him. She was crying because she'd been caught. She was crying because he wasn't the lifeless puppet she'd grown comfortable controlling. She was crying because, for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't the one holding the power. Ethan, I love you, her voice cracked. I waited for you. I was there every day. Do you have any idea what it felt like to watch you lying there, not knowing if you'd ever wake up? He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Tell me, Clara, did you love me while he was inside you? She gasped, horror flashing across her face. Ethan. He leaned forward, ignoring the screaming ache in his body, the muscles that had wasted away from years of disuse. Pain didn't matter, not compared to the fire roaring in his chest. Did you love me while you let another man touch you? Ethan, please, she begged, her voice barely above a whisper. Who is he? He asked again, sharper, colder. Clara's lips trembled. She squeezed her eyes shut, and then, barely above a breath, Nathan Pierce. Nathan Pierce, his best friend, the man who'd stood beside him at his wedding, the man who'd promised to look after Clara if anything ever happened to him, the man who'd kissed his bride's forehead on their wedding day and whispered, I'm happy for you both. The man who'd been in this room, whispering things to Clara while he lay between life and death. Nathan Pierce. It made sense. The subtle tension he'd ignored between them in the early years. The way Nathan always kept an eye on her when they were out drinking. The way she laughed just a little too freely around him. The way he never introduced him to any of his girlfriends, because he was already in love with his wife. And she'd let him have her. How long? His voice was barely recognizable. Clara shook her head, more tears falling. Ethan, please. How long? He ground out each word. She bit her lips so hard he thought she might draw blood, but he didn't care. He wanted the truth. He wanted to burn every illusion he had left of the woman he once loved. A year, she finally admitted, her voice breaking. It happened after the first year. The world tilted. A year. 1 year after his coma. 1 year after she'd held his hand and sworn she'd never give up on him. 1 year before she stopped pretending to love him and started letting another man inside the home he'd built for them. He closed his eyes, took a slow, deep breath, tried to ignore the suffocating weight pressing down on his chest. Then he exhaled. Get out. Clara flinched. Ethan. I said get out. This time, his voice was like ice. She reached for him again, but he didn't move, didn't flinch. He was done. She hesitated, waiting, hoping he'd change his mind. But he didn't. Eventually, she let out a choked sob, grabbed her purse, and ran. The door slammed behind her. The silence left in her wake was deafening. He turned his gaze to the window, to the city he hadn't seen in 3 years. Somewhere out there, Nathan was waiting for her. Somewhere out there, the life he once knew was already gone. But that was fine, because somewhere out there was a life waiting for him. One where he wasn't someone's second choice. One where he wasn't a broken man waiting to be discarded. one where he didn't just wake up to survive. He woke up to destroy. The silence was unbearable. Even after Clara left, the room still felt contaminated, tainted by the weight of her betrayal. Her perfume lingered in the air, mixing with the sterile scent of antiseptic, but all he could smell was deceit. He wanted to scream, to rip the IVs out of his arm, to erase every trace of her from this room, from his life. But he was trapped, in a body that had wasted away, muscles weak from atrophy, a shadow of the man he once was. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms, but even that pain felt insignificant compared to the fire roaring in his chest. Nathan Pierce. He'd trusted him, like a brother, in everything but blood. He'd let him into his life, his home, his marriage, and he'd taken everything from him. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to push back the rage, the humiliation. But memories came flooding. Clara and Nathan laughing at his jokes, her leaning into his touch just a little too much, Nathan looking at her when he thought he wasn't watching, his gaze lingering just a second too long. The whispered conversations, the quick glances, the way she never seemed truly alone when he was working late nights. He'd ignored it. He'd trusted her. What a fool he'd been. The weight of 3 years of silence pressed down on him. He'd listened to everything, unable to move, unable to fight back. And now? Now he'd woken up to find himself a ghost in his own life. He had nothing. His wife had moved on. His best friend had taken his place. His company, the empire he'd built with his own hands, was now run by people who probably assumed he'd never wake up. He was nothing more than a relic of the past, a problem to be dealt with. The heart monitor beeped erratically. His breathing was shallow, the weight in his chest growing heavier, suffocating. He needed to get out of here. He reached for the 4 attached to his arm, ready to rip it out. But before he could, the door creaked open. "Ethan," a hesitant voice called. He turned his head, expecting Clara, but it wasn't her. It was Derek Voss, his lawyer, his closest confidant outside of Nathan. The only man he knew who might still be loyal to him. He stepped inside, his sharp blue eyes scanning him as if trying to assess the damage. He looked older, more stressed. His usually polished suit was slightly wrinkled, a rare sight for a man who prided himself on perfection. He let out a slow breath, running a hand through his dark hair. "You're really awake." He nodded. Unfortunately, a flicker of emotion crossed Derek's face, something between relief and unease. He understood. Derek had probably already guessed what he knew. "How bad is it?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Derek hesitated. His silence was answer enough. "How bad, Derek?" he repeated, sharper this time. He let out a slow breath. "Bad." That single word carried the weight of everything he'd lost. I leaned back against the pillows, exhaustion washing over me. I'd expected it, but hearing it out loud made it real. Derek cleared his throat. "Legally, you're still alive, but you were declared mentally incapacitated 2 years ago. The board of directors at Heart Dynamics voted to replace you as CEO. Clara was given power of attorney. Of course she was. She had control over my company, my assets, my entire legacy. And knowing Clara, she'd probably been playing the role of the perfect grieving wife while milking every benefit that came with my coma." I let out a bitter chuckle. "And now that I'm awake." Derek hesitated. "The board isn't exactly thrilled." I turned my gaze toward him, my jaw tightening. "Let me guess, they don't want me back." Derek exhaled sharply. "They think you're unstable. You've been unconscious for 3 years, Ethan. To them, you're a liability. A liability to my own company." I clenched my jaw, my fingers curling into fists. "And Clara?" Derek's face darkened. "She's been fighting to keep control. Officially, she's been managing your affairs in your absence. Unofficially, she's been using your money, your power, and your influence to protect herself. If she loses that, she loses everything." My stomach twisted. It all made sense now. She wasn't here out of love. She was terrified I'd take everything back. She was trying to control the damage. "Do I still own my shares?" I asked. Derek nodded. "Yes, but the board has the majority vote. If they decide to permanently remove you, you'll be locked out. Locked out from the company I built from the ground up, from the empire I sacrificed everything for. And the worst part? Nathan was on that board." A sharp, humorless laugh escaped me. The betrayal ran deeper than I thought. Nathan hadn't just taken Clara. He'd positioned himself at the top of my empire, ensuring that if I ever woke up, I'd have nothing left. I turned my gaze back to Derek, my voice cold. Tell me, Derek, how hard would it be to burn everything they built? Derek blinked, hesitating. Ethan, I don't want to take it back. I cut him off, my grip tightening around the sheets. I want to bury them. Nathan, Clara, the board, every single person who thought I was gone for good. I didn't just want to take back what was mine. I wanted to make them regret every single second they spent underestimating me. Derek studied me for a long moment, and then he smiled. Not a kind smile, a knowing one. He pulled out a folder from his briefcase and placed it in front of me. I figured you'd say that, he said simply. So I took the liberty of preparing something. I stared at the folder, my chest rising and falling with slow, controlled breaths. Inside that folder was the key to my revenge. Let the games begin. Derek slid the folder across the hospital bed table. I stared at it, fingers hovering over the cover, my pulse pounding. Inside was proof, the blueprint to destroying everyone who'd tried to erase me. But as I opened it, the first document made my blood run cold. It wasn't just about Clara and Nathan. It was so much worse. You're going to want to read that carefully, Derek said, his tone darker than before. Because what I found goes deeper than you think. I skimmed the pages, eyes darting over financial records, legal statements, contracts, things I never authorized. Millions of dollars were funneled out of my accounts. Business deals were signed under my name while I was in a coma. Properties I never purchased, money I never spent. What the hell is this? My voice was eerily calm, but my grip on the pages tightened until my knuckles turned white. Derek leaned back against the chair, watching me carefully. It's what Clara has been doing while you were asleep. I exhaled sharply, flipping to the next page. Then I saw his name. Nathan Pierce, CEO of Heart Dynamics. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. He has my title. Derek nodded. That's not all. He handed me another document, a marriage certificate. Clara Hart Pierce. The room spun. The heart monitor beside me beeped wildly. Married. They got married. I thought Clara was just having an affair, that she was just using Nathan as a replacement while I was in a coma. But they didn't just replace me, they erased me. They didn't even wait, Derek muttered. She declared you mentally incapacitated and moved forward with the legal separation. The moment the courts approved it, she married him. The paper trembled in my hands. 3 years. It had taken her 1 year to start sleeping with him, another to legally remove me from her life, and the last to spend it enjoying my money, my empire, and my best friend. I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. She really thought I'd never wake up. Derek sighed. I think she still believes she can control you, that she can manipulate you into walking away quietly. But he watched me carefully, waiting. I closed the folder, staring blankly at the ceiling. They'd won. They'd rewritten history while I was unconscious, and now they wanted me to disappear. Derek's voice was measured when he spoke next. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I took a deep breath, and then I smiled. Burn them. Derek's lips curled. That's what I was hoping you'd say. I pushed myself up, ignoring the screaming protest of my weakened muscles. My body was fragile, but my mind was sharper than ever. They think they buried me. I murmured, rolling my shoulders, feeling the weight of rage settle in my bones. But they forgot one thing. Derek raised a brow. What's that? I turned to him, my smile dark, calculated. I don't stay dead. The gala was there, a grand, extravagant event that Clara and Nathan had carefully curated over the years, using my company, my resources, my legacy. Tonight, I was going to burn it all down. I stood in the shadows, my tailored black suit fitting perfectly, the crisp, white cuffs peeking from beneath my jacket. I'd reclaimed everything. My body had regained its strength after weeks of brutal physical therapy. My mind had sharpened, every piece of the game falling into place. Nathan and Clara thought I was gone. They had no idea I was here. As I stepped forward into the golden glow of the ballroom, heads turned, gasps, murmurs, shock. And then her eyes met mine. Clara. Her champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering against the marble floor. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. Nathan turned at the sound, his brows furrowed, but the moment his gaze landed on me, his face paled. Checkmate. The room fell into hushed whispers. Ethan Hart. But this can't be real. Clara's chest rose and fell rapidly, her perfectly composed mask cracking. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Nathan recovered first. He forced a smirk, stepping forward as if this was some kind of joke. "Ethan," he greeted, his voice smooth but his eyes betraying him. Fear, panic. "You're awake." I tilted my head slightly, smirking. "That's all you have to say?" Clara blinked rapidly, her mind racing to regain control. "Ethan, I cut her off. "Enjoying my money, my company, and my name, are you?" Her breath caught. Nathan stepped forward, attempting his usual charm, but I wasn't playing anymore. "Ethan, let's talk." "We're past talking." I raised my hand, and at that exact moment, the lights dimmed. The screens around the ballroom flickered to life, and then the truth unraveled before them all. A video played, the surveillance footage from my hospital room. Nathan's voice was low, intimate. "He's never waking up, Clara. Stop pretending you care." Clara's response, dripping with amusement. "You think I'd waste my life playing the grieving widow? Ethan is dead to me." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Another clip, legal documents, financial transactions under my name. Millions stolen. Nathan's voice. "Once the board finalizes the transfer, Heart Dynamics will be ours." Clara laughing. "Finally." The crowd turned on them instantly. "What the hell is this? They stole from Ethan." She moved on with his best friend while he was in a coma. Nathan turned, his face red with fury. "Turn it off." Clara shook her head violently, eyes wild. "Ethan, this is a setup. You have to believe me." I took a step forward, looking her dead in the eye. "Believe you?" Clara's hands trembled. "Ethan." I spoke softly, but each word was a knife. "I begged for you in my sleep. For 3 years, I fought to return to you. And the moment I wake up, I find you in bed with my best friend." Clara's lower lip quivered. "You took everything from me." I leaned in closer. "And you're going to watch me take it all back." Nathan snapped, grabbing Clara's wrist. "Enough." He turned to me, his mask slipping. "You should have stayed dead." I let out a cold laugh. "You first." At that moment, security moved in, escorting them out. The guests watched in stunned silence, their king and queen dethroned. Clara screamed, fighting, sobbing, begging. Nathan shoved the guards away, but he was finished. Cameras flashed. Reporters swarmed. Everything they had built crumbled in a single night. The end and the beginning. The gala erupted into chaos, but I remained standing, unmoving, untouched. Derek approached, smirking. "I'd say that went well." I exhaled. It was over. I had won. As I turned to leave, a soft voice stopped me. "Ethan." I turned my gaze, meeting Anna's. She had been standing in the crowd, watching everything. Her dark eyes held something I hadn't seen in years, understanding. "You finally did it," she murmured. I studied her for a moment before replying. "Yes. But now." I started over. Anna smiled. "Then let's start together." And for the first time in a long time, I let someone in. The scandal shattered Clara and Nathan's perfect world. Within 24 hours, their names dominated the headlines. Billionaire betrayal. The fall of Clara Hart Pierce and Nathan Pierce. He stole his best friend's wife and company. Now he's paying the price. Exposed. Former CEO Ethan Hart's shocking revenge. Heart Dynamics board wasted no time. With overwhelming evidence of fraud, Nathan was forcibly removed from his position. His name was blacklisted in the corporate world. No one would ever trust him again. Clara lost everything. With no access to my money, she was left scrambling. Her once loyal followers turned on her. Overnight, the socialite scene shunned her. And the worst part? She had no one left. Nathan, the man she'd risked everything for, was gone. After a failed attempt to manipulate the media, he vanished. Some said he fled the country. Others said he was hiding from loan sharks. Either way, he was out of my story. 1 month later, I stood at the edge of a cliffside estate, overlooking the ocean. The sun was setting, casting streaks of gold across the waves. A new home, a new start. The wind carried a soft, familiar voice behind me. "You really left nothing for them," Anna murmured, stepping beside me. I smirked, hands in my pockets. "I gave them what they deserved." She studied me for a long moment. "You don't regret it." I exhaled, staring at the waves crashing below. Did I? Did I regret watching Clara crumble under the weight of her own betrayal? Did I regret dismantling Nathan's empire brick by brick? No, not even a little. Anna smiled, the evening light catching in her dark eyes. "Good," she said softly, "because now you get to live. Live, not for revenge, not for a past that no longer exists. For yourself." I turned to her, taking in the woman who had stood by me when the world fell apart. A woman who knew what it meant to be betrayed, to rise from the ashes. I reached for her hand, intertwining our fingers. Anna stilled for a moment, then smiled. And just like that, my past was behind me, and my future was just beginning.